general public after the end of this session. If you would like the link to the recording, just contact me or check our website. We should make it available on the website. So I wanted to welcome everybody. My name is John Haber. I'm the Field Services Director for the California Preservation Foundation. The California Preservation Foundation is a membership-based not-for-profit organization whose mission
Thank you, Jonathan. All right, well, welcome. As Jonathan let you know, I'm Jenan Saunders. I'm the Deputy State Historic Preservation Officer, and I will be your presenter today. I am sorry that the State Historic Preservation Officer, Carol Rowland-Nowie, couldn't join us today. She had another engagement she needed to be at, but hopefully she'll join us for one of our future webinars. As Jonathan let you know, this is the first of a series of 4 webinars we have planned over the next, I think, 9 months or so, in conjunction with the California Preservation Foundation to provide information about our office and the programs that we administer. So we thought for this first webinar it would make sense to give you a very broad overview of the Office of Historic Preservation, really an introduction to our office and what we do. I think the title describes it from a 10,000-foot level. So I'll speak for probably about the next half hour, 40 minutes or so, and then leave plenty of time for questions. And as I'm going through the programs that our office administers and talking about them, if one of them is a subject of a future webinar that we have scheduled for next year, I'll let you know that so that you know you can sign up for that webinar if it's a program that you're interested in. So, to give you a little bit of background to begin with, in terms of the legislative basis for our office and what we do, each state in the Union and territory has an Office of Historic Preservation. The program as we know it was first started in 1966 with the passage of the National Historic Preservation Act. That act called for each state to establish a State Historic Preservation Officer, or SHPO. If you ever hear the term SHPO, that's what it stands for, and a State Historic Resources Commission or Advisory Board or Review Board. They go by different names in different states. Here in California, they're known as the State Historical Resources Commission. That act also established the Historic Preservation Fund, which provides half of our office's budget, which is matched by the states. So our office is jointly funded by federal and state funds. 3 years after the National Historic Preservation Act was passed, state laws here in California were passed to bring California's program into compliance with federal law. California, since the 1930s or so, had in existence a Historical Landmarks Advisory Committee, and in 1969, the laws regarding that committee were changed to bring its responsibilities and authority and background in line with the federal mandates. And then later it had its name changed as well. 3 years after that, the California History Preservation Section was established within the Department of Parks and Recreation, or California State Parks. And in that respect, California chose to mirror the federal model, where the federal historic preservation program is housed in the National Park Service. So here in California, we placed the State Historic Preservation Program within the State Park Service, California State Parks. And then 3 years later, I guess 3 really is a magic number when it comes to preservation here in California, the Office of Historic Preservation was officially established by the director of the Department of Parks and Recreation. And we have a lovely 1970s shot here of the staff in the Office of Historic Preservation in 1977, which looks like it's about a third to a half of the size of our staff now. So we've grown quite a bit since 1977. The mission of the Office of Historic Preservation is to provide leadership and promote the preservation of California's irreplaceable and diverse cultural heritage. To fulfill our mission, we do a number of things. We partner with local, state, federal, and tribal agencies, nonprofit organizations, and the general public to help ensure cultural resources are appreciated and maintained as a matter of public interest and community pride. We also carry out mandated responsibilities and administer programs under both federal and state historic preservation laws. We promote a comprehensive preservation planning approach and urge the integration of historic preservation into broader land use planning efforts and decisions. We offer technical assistance and preservation training in order to create a better understanding of the programs that our office administers. We support sustainability and adaptive reuse of historic resources in ways that preserve historic character and provide economic benefits. We maintain the statewide historical resources inventory and make available information about the state's historical and archaeological resources through that inventory. And we encourage recognition of the vital legacy of cultural, educational, recreational, aesthetic, economic, social, and environmental benefits of historic preservation for the enrichment of present and future generations. We derive our authority, as I introduced, largely from federal legislation, the National Historic Preservation Act, and state law, mostly found in the Public Resources Code. As I mentioned earlier, we're jointly funded by federal funds coming from the National Park Service and state funds that come to us through California State Parks, or the Department of Parks and Recreation. That's what the DPR on this slide stands for. We receive direction for what we do from standards and guidelines put out by the Secretary of the Interior. from regulations put out by the National Park Service, and I should have added to this slide the Federal Advisory Council on Historic Preservation, and from our grant agreement with the National Park Service, which lays out certain things that we're required to do and how we're required to do them. And finally, by the goals and objectives that are outlined in our 5-year statewide historic preservation plan, which you can find on our website. And I'll talk about our website in a minute. We have both a regulatory and an advisory role, and generally we're called upon to exercise both in order to advocate successfully for the preservation of cultural resources. As I'll explain in a minute, and you'll see, our official regulatory role only goes so far. People often think we have far more powers than we do, far more authority than we do in this office. So a lot of times we're really advising and assisting and sort of being an advocate for resources above and beyond our official regulatory role. We place information about just about everything we do on our website. So that's a good starting point when you're looking for information about our office or even contact information. Go to our website. There's a lot there. You can spend many hours going through the information on our website. And although it's fuzzy on this slide, I have it on my final slide in the presentation, but our website's ohp.parks.ca.gov. We have about 35 people who work in the office. This is the org chart of our office here, basically grouped into 5 units. And you can see by the names of the units on this slide that 4 of those units involve some level of environmental compliance review. So it's a big part of what our office does. But our units are generally revolve around either customer groups or program areas. So we have our local government and environmental compliance unit, architectural review and environmental compliance, archaeology and environmental compliance, and registration programs and environmental compliance. And then we also have a 5th unit sort of that handles a lot of admin as well as our inventory, our fiscal grants and information management unit. And as this slide indicates, we are advised by the State Historical Resources Commission. So we're guided by an appointed commission, which is made up of 9 members who are appointed by the governor. By law, the commission reviews registration nominations, assists with inventory maintenance, establishes or approves of criteria and policies that we use in our office, oversees administration of the largest state registration program, the California Register of Historical Resources, and helps develop the statewide historic preservation plan and adopts that plan. 7 of our commissioners each fill a certain slot. We have history, architectural history, historic archaeology, prehistoric archaeology, architecture, ethnic history, and folklore. And then we have 2 slots for public members as well. The commission meets quarterly each year, usually in Sacramento, but we do hold 1 meeting a year in conjunction with the California Preservation Conference, wherever it's being held. So next year in April, we will be in San Diego in conjunction with that conference. So in talking about the programs that our office administers, I thought I would start with environmental compliance because it is the biggest part of what we do in the office. I would say a majority of our staff time in the office is spent on environmental compliance review, maybe even up to 2/3, if not a little bit more than 2/3 of our staff time. And we have environmental compliance review responsibilities under both federal and state law. So on the federal side, we assist federal agencies in complying with sections 106 and 110 of the National Historic Preservation Act. Under Section 106, we review, comment on, and concur with federal agencies' findings in relation to projects or programs that fall under the law's definition of an undertaking. This includes projects that a federal agency is conducting itself, that are taking place on federal property, or have some sort of federal funding or federal permits. With those 4 categories, you can see that's a lot of projects, especially here in California, where we have a lot of federal agencies, as well as a lot of federal money coming into our coffers. We are doing a webinar next year on consulting with our office under Section 106. So if Section 106 is something that's of interest to you, I suggest you look at signing up for that webinar. Section 110 of the National Historic Preservation Act it takes a proactive approach to planning for preservation of resources that federal agencies own. So federal agencies are required to go out and inventory resources and plan for their preservation or how they're going to be maintained. So it applies only to those agencies that own land, but that's still a lot of land here in California that falls under Section 110 as well. On the state side, California has its own, what might be called a light version of Sections 106 and 110 as outlined in Public Resources Code Sections 5024 and 5024.5. 5024 is kind of like Section 110 in that it requires state agencies that own property to inventory resources and add them to what's known as the master list that our office maintains of state-owned historical resources. Section 5024.5 is much like Section 106 in that it requires state agencies to consult with our office and to look for ways to minimize or mitigate impacts to historical resources as part of that consultation process. Unlike Section 106, however, Public Resources Code 5024.5 and 5024 only apply to state-owned property. So it doesn't apply to projects that are simply being funded or permitted by a state agency. It applies to state-owned property itself. But in a way, that's okay, because here in California, we have another code that picks up projects permitted or funded by state agencies, and that is the big California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA for short. Which applies to all public agency discretionary actions. So it covers both state and local agencies here in California. Our office doesn't have as much authority under CEQA as we do under Section 106 or PRC 5024.5, but we can and do comment on projects being reviewed under CEQA by state agencies or local agencies. There are a lot of CEQA projects going on at any given time in the state of California, and our office isn't automatically notified of all of them. In fact, I guess I'm glad we aren't, because I don't know what we would do with all of that paper that would be coming into us. But that means that we depend on members of the public to let us know when there's a project being contemplated on which we might want to comment under CEQA. Generally, we only comment on CEQA projects where the public agency is not fulfilling its obligations under CEQA in relation to historical resources, where it isn't properly evaluating historical resources or evaluating the impacts on those resources. Or in some instances, we also might get involved when a project threatens a resource of statewide or national significance. And this was the one slide in my presentation where I wasn't able to provide you with captions for the pictures. So for those of you who are sticklers for wanting to know what's in those pictures, I thought I would just tell you. Going clockwise from top left, we have the Tower Bridge in Sacramento, and then next to it is the House of Tomorrow in Palm Springs, also known as the Elvis Presley Honeymoon House. Below the Honeymoon House is Coit Tower on Telegraph Hill in San Francisco. And then on the left is the House of Hospitality in Balboa Park in San Diego. And for some reason, there was another picture on this slide that you might be seeing and I'm not seeing. In the middle was actually a very interesting picture of the fish trap at Ajumawi Lava Springs State Park in Shasta County. So if you can see that picture, that's what that's of. All right, so moving on from environmental compliance, environmental review responsibilities in the office, we also have 2 restoration architects who undertake architectural review and assist the other units in the office when there are architectural review issues going on. Most of their time is spent overseeing the Federal Rehabilitation Tax Credit Program in California. That's a program that allows for a tax credit, income tax credit of up to 20% for qualified expenditures on rehabilitation of certain types of historical resources. In addition to the work that they do on that program, they also provide technical assistance, assist with interpretation of guidelines, mostly the Secretary of the Interior standards for the treatment of historic properties. They get involved in issues related to accessibility improvements, which often can run in conflict with historic materials and historic structures, and finding ways to provide for accessibility without harming historical resources. And they often are consulted when it comes to energy efficiency improvements. We get lots of questions about windows, as do many folks in the preservation community. Finally, they also help to promote the use of incentives for historic properties. One incentive that our restoration architects particularly get involved in is the State Historic Building Code. I should make it clear that on the state level, the State Historic Building Code is overseen by another state agency and overseen by the State Historic Building Safety Board, but we often get called into situations as well where people are looking at using the State Historic Building Code. On the local government side, we provide a lot of assistance to local governments. In a way, that's because we have no direct authority over what local governments do in relation to historic resources. So instead of that direct authority, we do a lot of advising and assisting. We provide training and technical assistance to local governments as our resources allow. And sometimes when our resources are kind of tight, we have to limit that to our certified local governments, which I'll talk about in a minute at the bottom of this slide. We assist with preservation planning efforts being undertaken by local governments. We help with the development of design guidelines and local ordinances. And this is important because local ordinances are often the best place where you can work to preserve historic resources. Federal and state laws only go so far, and they only apply to certain types of projects. At the local level, a local historic preservation ordinance can be your strongest protection for historical resources. So we feel it's very important to help local governments understand how to write a good ordinance as well as good design guidelines. We provide funding and staff assistance with surveys and context statements through our Certified Local Government Grant Program. We provide training for local historic preservation commissions, and we help local governments develop incentives for historic preservation, kind of like as I was discussing that local ordinances are your best place for working to preserve historical resources. Local incentives are often the best incentives you can provide for the preservation of historical resources. And so helping local governments understand what types of incentives they can put in place and how those incentives can be used to promote preservation is an important part of what we do. And as part of that, we also promote use of the Mills Act property tax abatement program. The Mills Act is a state law, and it's a voluntary program that cities and counties can choose to participate in that provides for abatement of property taxes, can be by up to a half, depending on the nature of the property taxes and the contract that's written between the property owner and the local government. But we do promote use of that program. And then finally, we administer the Certified Local Government Program and provide grants to those certified local governments, competitive grants. The CLG program, as it's known for short, is a federal program. It's set up in the National Historic Preservation Act, and basically it certifies local governments who have preservation programs that meet certain minimum standards. And then when they meet those standards, they apply to us and we certify them, and that makes them eligible for assistance from us, as well as make them eligible to compete for competitive grants that we make available each year. Probably the most visible part of the office in terms of the general public are our registration programs. And we manage 4 registration programs here in California. One is at the national level, and 3 are state level registration programs. The National Register of Historic Places, the California Register of Historical Resources, California Historical Landmarks, and Points of Historical Interest. And I'll go into a little bit of detail about each of those programs to give you some background on them and the way that they work. So first, the National and the California Registers, and I kind of deal with them together because they're similar. I'll do the same thing with landmarks and points. But the National Register and the California Register have very similar criteria, and that's intentional. The California Register was created in the 1990s, intentionally sort of based upon the National Register model, although there are some slight differences between the two. Both programs designate buildings, structures, objects, sites, and districts. And properties can be significant at the local, state, or national level and be eligible for either program. A lot of people think National Register, that must mean that something is sort of nationally significant, or state register, that means something is significant at a statewide level. No, that's not necessarily the case. In fact, the bulk of resources that are listed on the National Register and the California Register are significant at the local level only, although some of them do rise to the state level and the national level, obviously. There are 4 basic criteria for designation of resources under the National Register and the California Register, and resources can fall under multiple criteria. So a resource might be associated with events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history. It might be associated with the lives of persons important to our history, might embody the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, region, or method of construction, or represents the work of a master, or expresses high artistic ideals. Or a resource might have yielded or has the potential to yield information important to our history or prehistory. And then one sort of overarching criteria that all resources must have to be eligible for either of these programs is integrity. And integrity is not structural integrity, it's historic integrity. It's how much does the resource look like it did during its period of significance. And integrity is assessed based upon 7 aspects: location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. And not all resources will necessarily retain high integrity in all 7 aspects. You kind of determine the need for integrity in which aspects based upon the reasons that the resources are significant. Generally, if a resource is significant under criterion C or 3 for architectural or artistic merit, it's held to the highest level of needing to have integrity, because it's important that it has all 7 aspects of integrity, or most of them, in order to convey the reasons for its significance. Oh, and one thing I wanted to make a point of, two things actually to make a point of before I leave this slide. One is that we will be having a webinar next year on preparing nominations for the National Register. So if preparing a nomination is something that you're interested in, look for that webinar. And then also I wanted to point out that the California Register is the only program that we administer that has what's called automatic listings. Everything that is listed on the National Register, as well as all resources that are formally determined eligible for the National Register, get automatically listed on the California Register. And then the California Register also has automatic listings of certain state historic landmarks and points of historical interest. Basically, those that have integrity also get automatically listed on the California Register as well, which means, as you might imagine, we don't get a lot of nominations directly for the California Register. Usually someone will go ahead and prepare a National Register nomination or a landmark nomination, knowing that that property is going to get automatically listed on the California Register when it's designated under one of those other programs. So moving to the Landmarks and Points program, actually the California Historical Landmarks program is the oldest state level designation program in California. It predates even the National Historic Landmarks program. And it has criteria that the property must be significant on a statewide basis or in a very large geographical area, northern, central, southern California, for example. So the three criteria that are applied to the landmarks program are: one, that a resource might be the first, last, only, or most significant of its type within the state or within a very large geographic region. And by type, we mean might be the first, last, only, or most significant school or bank or church or library, for example. Or it might be associated with an individual or group having a profound influence on the history of the state as a whole or a large geographic region. Or it might be a prototype of or an outstanding example of a period, style, architectural movement, or construction, or as one of the more notable works or the best surviving work in a region of a pioneer architect, designer, or master builder. So those are basic three criteria for both programs. Now the points program, the State Historic State Points of Historical Interest program, was created because many properties that are worthy of designation didn't rise to the level of being a landmark. You could say this is a significant resource and it fits within this criteria, but not on a statewide basis or within a large geographic area. So the points program has the same criteria as the landmarks program, but it's geared towards the local level, the city or county level. So you take those same three criteria, but you apply them within a city or county context rather than statewide or a large geographic region. For the points and landmarks program, there is no requirement that the resources have integrity. If they don't have integrity, they're listed as the site of that resource's name rather than the resource itself. And when they don't have integrity, they don't get automatically listed on the California Register. Because the California Register requires resources to have integrity, it wouldn't be appropriate to automatically list landmarks and points that don't have integrity on the California Register. All right, so moving off of registration programs, we have the California Historical Resources Information System, or CRIS, which is another big part of what our office does and takes a lot of my time, I must admit. The CRIS maintains California's inventory of cultural resources. It's a partnership between our office and 10 regional information centers located throughout the state, and is overseen by the State Historic Preservation Officer and the State Historical Resources Commission. In fact, in recent years, the Commission has gotten very involved in the CRIS and in providing direction for the CRIS. If you pay attention to our Commission's agendas, you'll see that the CRIS ends up on just about every agenda of our Commission over the last 3 or 4 years. So it's a very high priority for management in the office. The CRIS provides access to the inventory, and the information centers are the ones who actually provide that direct access for organizations, agencies, consulting firms, tribes, and individuals. And they answer general cultural resource questions from the public, as well as questions about accessing and using the inventory. The CRIS inventory includes nearly 650,000 resource records, research reports, and other data, to which an average of 20,000 new resource records and research reports are added each year. So it's a big volume of information. And what's kind of made this a big deal in the last couple of years is that we're currently in the process of converting that inventory from a paper-based system to a digital system. So we're creating database entries related to all of those resources. We're creating GIS shape files for all of those resources and report areas, and we're creating PDFs of paper documents. So it's a big process, and with all of that information, as you might imagine, it's not moving quickly, but we are getting there slowly but surely. And next year, what our fourth webinar next year will be about accessing the CRIS inventory. So if that's something that's of interest to you, keep an eye out for that webinar. I think it was scheduled to be in July of next year. I thought this was a good point to kind of stop and talk about what OHP does not do, because a lot of people think that we have a lot more authority than we do to preserve historical resources. We do what we can, but we don't have as much authority as folks think. And predominantly, it's important to note, we are not the preservation police. For federal undertakings, we do have some authority to work with agencies to lessen the impacts of proposed projects. Same goes for projects that may impact state-owned property. But beyond that, our authority is really merely in an advisory capacity, especially for the multitude of projects that fall only under CEQA and not under some other federal or state law or regulation. And when an agency chooses to not comply with certain laws or not comply with them to the degree that we think that they should, we don't have any recourse outside of the courts to make them do the right thing. We don't get to go out and write them a ticket or take them to jail or something like that. Basically, we get to comment and then we could sue them. Well, as you might imagine, lawsuits from the state don't happen very often. So we're really trying to assist them in understanding what their responsibilities are and help them see what they should be doing when it comes to historical resources, especially under CEQA, and help them understand the law. So what does that really mean? What it means is that we in the Office of Historic Preservation really rely on our preservation partners, especially national, statewide, and local advocacy groups, as well as tribes, to work with us to put pressure on agencies to do the right thing. Sometimes PR pressure, public relations pressure, is the most effective option available for helping to preserve historical resources. And so we really look to working with our advocacy partners to help us when we don't have the authority to do anything more than sort of assist, advise, and advocate. But I do hate to end on a negative note. So I thought I'd end with talking about our outreach and communications efforts. And last year, we were very happy to hire a new outreach and communications coordinator for the office who is just doing great things in the last year or so, and more to come, I'm sure, in the future. So let me talk about ways that you can learn more about our office and interact with us. We put out a newsletter known as Preservation Matters 3 to 4 times per year, more like 3, 4 when we're feeling really ambitious. The newsletter is not on a set schedule. It's sort of as we're able to and resources allow, but each issue focuses on a particular theme. So earlier this year, we had an issue that came out that focused on sort of California on the cutting edge when it comes to preservation. Over the summer, we put out one on heritage tourism, and right now we're developing one dealing with cultural diversity. For next year, we have identified 2 of our 3 themes, so we know that we'll be putting out an issue related to tribal concerns, tribal issues when it comes to preservation, and then we're looking at an issue focused on modernism, modern architecture, and we're not sure about the 3rd theme, so you'll have to stay tuned for that. In addition to the newsletter, we put out a monthly preservation e-post by email, and the reason that we really like the e-post is because the newsletters don't come out on a set schedule and because they're thematic, they are not really a place where we can put out timely or newsy types of information. So that's what we use our e-posts for. The e-posts really tell you about upcoming training opportunities, events, new guidance that might have come out from a federal agency or on the state side, laws that have been passed that you may want to know about. So it's much more of a news and timely information type of update that goes out basically the first week of each month. We do, as I mentioned before, push out a lot of news and information via our website, guidance, program information. Our website's the best place to go. And we've just started kind of in the last 6 months or so getting into social media, mostly using our Facebook page. And if you go to visit our Facebook page, you'll see that it predominantly focuses on our landmarks program. That's basically because the landmarks program is, in terms of the general public, really the most visible program that we administer, the one that most people seem to be interested in. The landmarks program is places those big bronze plaques throughout the state that you see as you're driving down the road or taking a walk through your neighborhood. And people are really interested in those plaques and kind of getting out and visiting all of the landmarks. We even have a whole group of people that are known as landmarks questers who make it their mission to get out and visit as many landmarks as they possibly can in the state. And there are lots of them. There are over 1,000, so it's kind of a big job, but people are really into it. So you'll see a lot of that on our Facebook page. In addition to those types of outreach opportunities, we also obviously do webinars like this and participate in workshops and try to get out and do as much training as possible. And then finally, we have 2 awards programs that I view as outreach tools because they kind of get the word out there about preservation and the good things that are going on when it comes to preservation. The Governor's Historic Preservation Awards is a program that's been going on since the mid-'80s, and it gives out awards annually, usually between 10 and 15 or so awards per year. We put out a call for nominations in the beginning of the year, usually in January, with nominations due in May. And then we hold the award ceremony in November. In fact, this year's award ceremony will be next year here in Sacramento. The awards are given to individuals, organizations, and projects, both rehabilitation projects as well as interpretive projects that deal with historical resources. And we have an independent jury that goes through the nominations each year and makes decisions about which ones to recommend receive the award each year. And then last year, we just started giving an award in conjunction with the California Historical Society at History Day in California. For those of you who aren't familiar with History Day, it's basically like a science fair, but for people who are into history. And kids compete at the local level, developing performances, exhibits, documentary films, and websites and other types of media. And then if they do well at the local level, they move to the state level. And then if they do well at the state level, they move to the national level. And we give an award at the state level competition here in California for projects or entries that focus on historic places in California. And for more information about us, here's some our main desk phone number. If you're not sure who you want to talk to in the office, it's always best to call the main desk and explain what you're calling about, and they'll get you in touch with the right person. I've also given you our generic email address for the office. Again, kind of like the front desk phone number, you could send an email to this email, and it gets checked by our receptionist, and she forwards the emails to the appropriate people in the office based upon what you're interested in. And then finally, of course, our website is another place that you can go to. And if you know the particular program that you're interested in, we have all of our specific staff contact information is on our website. So you can go there to get in contact with a specific staff member. When you get to the program pages on our website, on the right-hand side, it will often tell you who to contact for more information about that program. So using our website is the place to go. And as I see, one of the questions came up in the chat box, and thank you for reminding me, I meant to let you know, you can email us at the email address on this slide. Let us know that you want to get signed up for our email list. And we use our email list for the monthly e-posts and to notify you when a new newsletter has come out. I meant to mention when I was on the last slide, we don't put out our newsletter in hard copy anymore. It only comes out electronically. So we post it on, and then we let people know that it's available through the monthly e-posts that we send out. So send an email to that, and that's how you can get signed up. Or you can call our front desk and give us your email address, and we'll add you to our email list. And that's the overview of our office in a nutshell. So what kinds of questions might you have?
Thanks, Jenan. I'm actually going to pull up an extra window while people are asking questions. And oh, that's a comment, it looks like. I was hoping to maybe share the SHPO website, and yeah, and then people could you could sort of guide me around as we're going through it, and people can look at it and see where you can get certain pieces of information. So give me a second here. It shouldn't take more than a minute. Okay. Do you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about the website and where you can find different programs and everything.
And you know, what we've tried to do with the website and what we're finding more and more, you know, even with software and stuff, is providing people with multiple avenues to get to what might be the same information is always a better way to go. So we use the boxes sort of coming down the screen here as a multiple avenues to different information, just based upon how you might want to approach it. But generally, most people would use the programs or the tools tabs at the top of the screen to get to specific information about our programs. And actually, we are working on the website and I know that there's a lot of drop-down opportunities under both of these tabs, so we're looking at kind of consolidating some of those drop-downs to make it easier for you to navigate the site. But you can see that we have really information about both initiatives that we're taking on. For example, under this tools tab, you can see Preserve Latino History. That's a new initiative that we started this year, building on the work that was done in the 80s related to looking at resources associated with diverse cultural groups in California and wanting to update that information. So we decided because the National Park Service is undertaking a big Latino history initiative themselves, that we would piggyback on that and start with Latino resources associated with Latinos history. We're developing a statewide context statement related to the history of Latinos in California in the 20th century, and we'll be using that to basically facilitate National Register nominations. It will be much easier for people to prepare National Register nominations in the future using that context. And we actually just received a grant from the National Park Service to prepare 8 to 12 nominations ourselves in-house that we'll be doing over the next 2 years to add to those resources that are listed on the National Register associated with Latino history. Also, if you want to know about us, the About OHP tab is obviously the best place to go. The mission that I read to you earlier is there, contact information, information about the State Historical Resources Commission. And actually, that might be a good one to click on, or you could click on the Commission tab, John, and get to information about Commission meetings. So you can see as we have meetings that get scheduled, schedules and notices get posted there, as well as agendas when an agenda is available, and then minutes after the meeting. And then we actually post all the pending nominations at the hearing at their next meeting so that you can go in and look at those nominations. Obviously, for archaeological properties, we withhold a lot of the locational information because it's confidential. But for everything else, we're very open and post that information on our website so that people can see what was heard in the past as well as what's coming up at the next meeting. What else might be interesting to you? Let's go to the CRIS. Now, we are working on revamping our CRIS web pages. So if the inventory is something that you're interested in, that's a good place to go to find out sort of the latest policies related to how you access that inventory. And like I said, actually, I've got sitting on my desk right now sort of a revamp of that part of our website to provide you with more information about how you access the CRIS inventory, who can access it, and the paperwork that you need to do it. As you might imagine, we're a big government bureaucracy, so there's always forms for something or another, and that's where you get to that information about the CRIS. Let's see, what else would be used? What's under the Programs tab? Programs tab is the one I tend to go to a lot because I want to look up registration programs, for example, or need to look up information about the California Main Street program. And so this is a quick, easy way to get to those main program areas that our office administers. Governor's Awards is a good one. Why don't you click on Governor's Awards?
Okay, one second, I missed it. I was ahead of myself there.
Especially since that's on my mind because we have our big event next week. So we've used it to announce the recipients of this year's Governor's Awards, as well as on this page we also like to give credit to the sponsors. Every year we have sponsors who sponsor the reception for the Governor's Awards because we are not allowed to use state funds to purchase food or beverages. And so we're very happy for our nonprofit sponsors, one of whom is the California Preservation Foundation, who help us with this awards program. But you can see this year we have 3 organizations that are receiving awards, as well as 2 interpretive projects, which is, we don't get a lot of project nominations. So myself having an interpretive background kind of made me happy. We got quite a few this year. And then we have, I think, about 7 restoration projects or rehabilitation projects all throughout the state, kind of a variety of different interesting types of resources. And every year after the award ceremony, we post on our YouTube page videos about each of the award recipients. So by the end of the calendar year, you'll be able to go to our YouTube page and watch a video about SciArc or a video about the Yochadehe Wintu Nation in terms of their preservation work. And so you can always kind of go to our, and oh yeah, you can go to our YouTube page from the top there. And now we have videos from, I think, the past 3 years worth of Governor's Awards posted on the page. And then we also try to link to other organizations that have videos related to preservation resources that you might find interesting.
Great. Thanks for the short tour.
Thank you.
So see if I could get us back in the room here. All right. I'll see if we had any questions in the meantime. Does anybody have any questions?
Yes,
Please do type them in. Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, you see it.
I see one. Let me pull it up. Are there any recent cases? Oh, no. Scott, one of the participants asked, are there any recent cases where the state chose to sue to stop a project from altering or removing a historic resource? None that I am aware of. It's very, very rare that the state would file a lawsuit. Generally, what we try to do here is help build the administrative record so that if a nonprofit advocacy group or a tribe wants to bring a lawsuit, we have comments on record sort of stating our thoughts in terms of whether a public agency has complied with regulatory laws. But that's generally as far as we can really go. It's just very, very rare for the Attorney General's office to be willing to bring a lawsuit, especially if you think of just sort of the PR of the state, one state agency suing another state agency, or state agency suing the federal government, or suing a local government. Just is a very hard thing to justify. I think it would need to be where like a national historic landmark is threatened and we just cannot get any traction any other way. But I have no knowledge of the state ever making that decision to sue. But like I said, we do try to help build the administrative record so when someone else wants to bring a lawsuit, there's information in the record that shows sort of our opinion as to what should have been done under historic preservation laws in relation to a particular resource.
Great. And I actually had a question of my own because we get a lot of calls from people asking how they should proceed on protecting a property, and often it's very reactive. Usually there's an imminent demolition of a property or something about to happen, maybe something that a major change of the structure that people are not quite pleased with, and they want to nominate the property um, for listing because they feel that will provide a different level of protection. Um, and they often ask us what steps they should take, and I try to warn them. It's a long process. It takes at least 4 months, 3-4 months at minimum, and it doesn't always guarantee that the resource will be protected. Often, especially if the owner is unwilling to, um, I guess, object to the listing of the property. And I'm wondering what sort of advice we should give people um, who are very passionate about these places, but aren't really sure what kind of steps to take, especially when they sort of do things last minute, unfortunately. Uh,
Yeah. And it is true. We do tend to be sort of a reactive species, don't we? And it's hard sometimes to be proactive because you don't know what threats might be looming for certain resources until those threats are right in front of you. So it's a very good question, Jonathan. And as you might imagine, we get lots of calls about that. And it's funny because we'll get someone who calls into our front desk and says, I want to nominate this building for the National Register. And so they get sent to our registration program people, but in reality, the only reason they think they want to nominate it is because they want to protect it from an impending demolition or some sort of bad alteration. So you're right. It's sort of a misunderstanding of the laws. And thanks for asking that, because I should point out that registration through one of the registration programs in our office does not guarantee any level of protection or preservation. It's somewhat honorary and comes with some benefits, and there is a little bit of protection under the California Environmental Quality Act, but that only really goes as far as the public agency who's carrying out CEQA wants to take it. So designation, like listing on the National Register, does mean that a property is considered significant under the California Environmental Quality Act because it gets automatically listed on the California Register. But all that really means is that a public agency, say a city or a county who's looking at a demolition permit, has to consider the impacts of that permit on the environment and needs to prepare a more involved environmental document and sort of explain why the benefits of demolition outweigh the benefits of, say, preservation or other impacts on the environment. But that's pretty much as far as CEQA goes. So you're right. Nomination in and of itself isn't going to solve anything. Plus, it is a very time-consuming process. Local designation is often the best level of protection you can have. So if you can get out in front of where those threats might be and nominate properties for local designation by the city or county in which they're located, local designation usually carries with it the highest level of protections for historical resources, because a local ordinance will then say, if this property is designated under this local ordinance, you can and can't do certain things to it. It will come right out and basically say, we won't issue a demolition permit, or we'll only issue a demolition permit in these certain very rare situations. Whereas state level designation or National Register designation doesn't carry that same level of protection unless the local government chooses to provide for it, which generally they don't. So I always advocate, if you can get out in front of it, local designation is your best way to go. But also on the advocacy side, it's getting in front of your local decision makers. So attending planning commission meetings or city council meetings where permits are being considered, and making your voice heard in terms of, hey, we care about this resource. We don't think you should issue this permit, or you should issue it in a different way, allow them to do something else, or look for other alternatives. And I've often found coming to the table with ideas for solutions instead of just sort of wanting to stop a project is the better way to get traction with your local government officials, whether they're elected officials like your city council or appointed officials like your planning commission. So, not looking like you're just sort of a bump in the road that they need to get around, but somebody who's coming to the table with ideas for, well, maybe there's a buyer for this resource that this property owner doesn't want to take care of anymore. Or in a worst case scenario, maybe we could move this resource to another location. We never like to move historical resources, but in many instances, it's going to be better than demolition. And if that's the only thing you've got, at least it's something. So coming to the table with ideas for solutions and making your voice heard to your local officials is really your best option. But that also kind of goes with federal projects and state projects. Getting in touch with those federal decision makers or state decision makers when a project rises to that level. It's just been in my experience, most of the time when we get the frantic calls from the public, it's people who, it's a privately owned resource that really the only jurisdiction anybody has over it is the city or county where they're going to get their permits from. So getting your voice out there, making your voice heard, letting your city council or your planning commission or your county board of supervisors know that people care about this resource, that can often change their decisions and help guide them in the right direction. Does that help?
Great. Oh, yeah, no, that helps a lot. Thank you.
Yeah.
And there was a second question. I don't know if you can see it down there right now.
Oh, yes. Is the Governor's Award ceremony open to the public? Unfortunately, it's not. We invite the award recipients. I wish we could make it available to the public, but we just don't have that kind of resources. So it is open only to the recipients of the awards, and because they often bring large contingents, we tend to fill up the room with just the recipients. But if you're interested in attending one, I would say prepare a nomination for next year. There must be some project or organization in your community that's worthy of recognition, and so you might be able to attend next year. We do also invite the nominators, the people who nominate organizations or projects, as well as the recipients.
Okay, I have one more question if nobody else is chiming in. I'm looking at the chat box now. I don't see anything, but I was wondering, you mentioned something about the National Register. And most people just start from that point. They submit the nomination for the National Register simply because the state nomination, you're automatically nominated on the state register through a National Register application. So I'm wondering, are there any benefits to just going straight to the state level and trying to nominate it at the state level? And would there be any other reasons why somebody would want to go to the state level nomination?
There's a slight, well, let's see. The National Register has a set of what are known as criteria considerations. For certain types of properties, there are special considerations that need to be given as to whether they're eligible or not. The California Register also has, the California Register calls them special considerations, but it does say for a reconstructed resource, a reconstructed building, needs to meet certain parameters. Tends to be the California Register is a little bit looser on those special considerations, and it specifically states that a property may not have integrity to make it eligible for the National Register, but might still be eligible for the California Register. So there may be some rare instances where, for integrity reasons, you might want to nominate it to the California Register. Although generally, when the law was written, the National Register was held to a somewhat higher integrity standard than it is now. People differ on this, but sort of what I heard when I came into the office and took over the California Register program. Nowadays, they're generally kind of viewed about the same. So there's not too much difference between the two programs. One difference is on the back end of the nomination process, and this kind of comes down to timing. If there's a reason why you want something to get listed sooner rather than later, it might make sense to go to the California Register because the State Historical Resources Commission, when they make a decision on a California Register nomination, it is final that day, the day that the commission meets. You know that property is listed on the California Register. When it comes to the National Register, the commission is merely making a recommendation to the keeper of the National Register in the National Park Service. And so obviously there's a delay because the commission makes its recommendation, has a meeting. The following week, our staff puts the paperwork together, sends it to the keeper of the National Register, and then the keeper has 45 days to review that and make a decision about listing. So it can be, a good 50 days to 60 days after the commission has heard a nomination for a property to actually get listed on the National Register. So it might get listed sooner if you're looking for it timing wise. But not to get too much into the weeds here, but I should point out the California Register, unlike the National Register, at the front end has a requirement that a nomination be sent to the local government for a 90-day review period before it even comes to our office. So you can get a National Register nomination to us more quickly than a California Register nomination because the National Register doesn't have that 90-day local government notification period. So it's a little bit of differences, but not too much. Not so much that, like I said, we probably get 2 nominations to the California Register a year, maybe at the most. Whereas National Register, we might get 20.
Interesting. All right, well, thank you. And I think everybody's questions were answered. I would hope so. And if not, I'm sure everybody has both of our contact information. And I'm happy to forward any questions to Jenan if I can't help in any way. Um, and at this point in the presentation, I'm going to encourage everybody. I wanted to thank the SHPO office and Jenan for devoting the time for today's session. But I would also like to encourage people to leave their feedback. This is our way of improving our programs, and Jenan will get a copy of this as well. And if you have any special requests for topics for upcoming webinars, or if you have any comments either about today or any of our other sessions, feel free to type them in the short answer boxes. I will mention that with the survey on the left, you will need to answer all of the questions and then scroll up to the top of the page and hit the submit response button, which um, oddly is at the top of the page. Usually it's at the bottom, but unfortunately we can't fix that at this moment in time. So don't forget to press that submit response button. I wanted to thank everybody for their interest and time today, and I hope it was an interesting session. And also, as Jenan mentioned, this is part of a quarterly series, and there's 3 other portions throughout the year. If you'd like to learn when those are and how to register for them, if you haven't already registered, you can go to news.californiapreservation.org, click on the events button, and there's a listing of all of the events throughout the year. I also wanted to encourage you one final time to join the California Preservation Foundation. For just $40 a year, you can take advantage of discounts on most of these events. And please have a great rest of the afternoon, and thanks, Jenan.
Thank you very much.